Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar. I'm Jim Huffman with the Integrated Benefits Institute, and I'll be moderating today's discussion. I'm joined by my teammate, Dr. Sarah Lee Garallo, IBI senior researcher who led this research project and will share key findings. We're also very excited to be joined today by Jackie Reinberg from American Benefits Consulting and Brett Gruss from Unum. Welcome, Jackie and Brett. Let's begin with a brief introduction of your role and why this topic is important to you. Jackie, let's start with you.
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jackie Reinberg. I'm with American Benefit Consulting. We are owned by Alliant, the fifth largest broker in the United States. I have been in the industry for about 4 decades, more than half of my time in consulting in the absence, disability, life space. And we work with all size markets at Alliant, but I typically serve those that are 20,000 lives and above.
Great. Thank you, Jackie, and welcome. Brett, how about you?
Sure. Hi, I'm Brett Gruss. I am with Unum. I've been with Unum for over 35 years. Unum is a Fortune 100 company that really focuses on the ancillary business. So your absence management programs, your disability, your life insurance, and voluntary products. And I have been working really in the 5,000 plus market with Unum for the majority of my tenure, over 35 years. So thanks for having me.
Great. Thank you both. Just a couple of housekeeping issues. We are scheduled for 1 hour for today's webinar. We are recording and we'll share the link as well as any slides that are presented with all who have registered for the webinar. I would encourage everybody to take advantage of the Q&A feature in the Zoom webinar and submit your questions as we go. Now, we've blocked some time at the end for questions, but please don't hesitate to drop your question in when the item hits your mind and you'd like to get it discussed by the panelist. Our topic today is benefit continuation during leave of absence, a seemingly simple concept that we all know is fraught with challenges. I'm confident that you're going to find today's discussion to be very informative. With that, let's get started. Sarah Lee, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Jim. I'm just going to share my screen to get started. All right, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I am Dr. Gurulal, and I'm delighted to welcome you to our webinar on employee benefits continuation during leave absence. Today, we'll talk through comprehensive research findings covering short-term disability, long-term disability, and unpaid personal leave, and we'll examine what's working, where the challenges lie, and provide actionable recommendations you can take back to your organization. Let me start by telling you a little bit about the research I did behind today's findings. In May of this year, we surveyed 304 senior HR and benefit leaders from large US employers, all with 2,500 or more employees. From a size perspective, we're well distributed, with 34% represent organizations between 25 to 5,000 employees, another 34 having between 5,000 and 10,000, and a good representation all the way up to 50,000 plus. Geographically, we looked at where our organizations operated. 33% were in multi-state regional footprints, 27% were national organizations operating in 11 or more states, 21% were single state, and 19% have international operations as well. Industry-wise, we had strong representation from technology, retail, wholesale, and manufacturing, and good representation as well across healthcare, financial services, education, and professional services. This diversity matters because, as you'll see, employers' practices vary significantly by size, industry, and geographic complexity. So our first major area is short-term disability. The headline here is that STD programs are nearly universal. 98% of surveyed employers offered them. The most common structure was employer paid at 79%, which reflects a strong commitment to wage protection during temporary health-related absences. When it comes to continuation during STD leave, benefit continuation, most employers are maintaining coverage, but there's a clear hierarchy of what's continued. 73% continue medical insurance for the full duration of the leave, 70% continue basic life insurance, 66% maintain vision coverage, and 64% keep dental insurance going, and about 61% extend voluntary life insurance. What really is interesting is how duration varies. 35% of programs offer coverage for 13 to 16 weeks. That's the most common bucket that we found in our survey. But here's where size matters. Larger employers, particularly those with 50,000 plus workers, were significantly more likely to extend coverage to the full 24 to 26 weeks. So we're talking about 18% of the largest employers versus just 8% of those with 2,000 to 5,000 employees. Industry patterns are equally revealing. Technology companies favor longer STD coverage. 32% offer 17 plus weeks of benefits compared to only 23% of manufacturing firms. And this aligns with the broader corporate talent strategies where tech firms are really competing aggressively for that retention. Looking at premium contributions during STD, it gets a little complicated. 56% of require employees to continue paying their portions of premiums during leave. So more than half of employers are asking employees who are already dealing with a health crisis and reduced income to maintain their out-of-pocket costs. On the flip side, 48% of cover the employee portion during leave, giving employees a financial break when they might need it the most. 30% defer collection until return to work. It's becoming increasingly popular, particularly among mid-sized employers. Organizations with 25,000 to 49,000 employees lead here at 59% versus the overall average we found at 30%. And another 30% adjust the premium structure entirely during the leave period. Another notable finding we saw was that organizations with an international operation maintain significantly stronger benefit protections. 85% continue medical coverage throughout STD versus only 66% of single-state employers. Jackie, let me turn to you for a moment. You work with employers of all sizes, but as you said, the more jumbo employers trying to navigate these decisions. What are you seeing in terms of the trade-offs that employers are wrestling with when they're deciding whether to cover these premium contributions versus asking employees to continue paying?
Well, part and parcel of it is that most large employers self-insure their short-term disability. And so most of them handle it as a payroll practice and pay directly out of their payroll. So because of that, and also they tend to have richer, more generous benefits, some including up to 100% of wage replacement when somebody is on short-term disability. So they are in a position to continue to take the benefit deductions much more readily than other organizations who may offer a lower wage percentage. As you said, it could be a problem for individuals who have a lesser piece, and understanding that these are taxable benefits as well, that creates an issue for organizations. But the larger market, for the most part, as long as they're paying out of payroll, it makes it very easy. For organizations that may have their partner or their carrier partner actually do their benefits for them, some of the carriers, many of them can do benefit deductions, except for certain ones like 401k. Others may have a third party who are doing premium collections. And some, as you said, they will just defer it till somebody comes back to work. The larger market really is very interested in keeping their talent. I think everyone's interested in keeping their talent, so they try and make it as easy as possible.
Yeah, and I think it speaks a little bit to the culture of the organization as well, looking after your people for that retention. Thank you. Okay, let's move on to long-term disability. And here's where we start to see that benefit continuation drop significantly. LTD programs are nearly as common as STD, with 96% of organizations offering coverage. And employer plans still dominate, though we see more shared costs and voluntary models here than we did with STD. But here's the critical shift. Coverage continuity drops markedly once employees transition to LTD. And that makes sense, right? LTD is long-term by definition, so cost considerations become much more significant. If we look at the numbers, only 52% of employers continue to cover medical for the full LTD period. Basic life insurance is continued by 46%, 45% continue voluntary life insurance, and dental and vision both hover around 49%. So if we compare this to the STD that we just talked about, or 73% continued medical insurance, that's a 21% percentage point drop. So this is where employees can find themselves in really vulnerable positions, losing coverage precisely when they have those ongoing medical needs. So again here, organizational variations tell an important story. The largest employers, those with 50K plus employees, maintain the strongest LTD protections. 71% continue medical coverage for the entire LTD period, compared to just 51% of those with 5,000 or less employees. And there's also significant industry variation. Technology and financial services lead the pack here, with over 60% continuing medical coverage fully during LTD. By contrast, healthcare and retail sectors are less, possibly due to tighter margins or different workforce norms. But again, we also see that geographic scope matters. 66% of organizations with international operations continue their medical insurance throughout LTD versus only 43% of single state employers. When we look at premium contributions during STD, cost sharing becomes even more burdensome for employees. 57% of employers require their employees to continue paying their portion of premiums. That's up from 56%, 1% during STD. And 41% cover employee portions during leave, which is down from 48% coverage during STD. But here's something that's interesting. 34% offer premium waivers based on disability provisions, and 28% leverage disability provisions to waive premiums entirely. So this is where maybe having a really dedicated benefits manager versus like a generalist HR can make a difference. Benefit managers are more likely to implement these waivers as they understand the policy mechanisms behind them. The bottom line here is that employees transitioning from STD to LTD face significant reduction in employer support, right when their financial and health situations may be the most precarious. Brett, I wanted to bring you into the conversation here on this. From Unum's perspective as a major disability insurer, you see how these policies play out in terms of employee outcomes and return to work rates. When employers maintain stronger benefit continuation during LTD versus cutting it off, what kind of impact does that have on overall disability and recovery trajectory?
Yeah, it's very positive. I mean, when people are out on disability, and there's an engagement, continued engagement, going on with the employer and employer, they're much more likely to return to work than if they're not. And they actually are more loyal to those employers that have extending leave policies like we're addressing here today. So having that dialogue, not only having programs that obviously extend coverage is a big one, that gains loyalty, but also a much stronger return to work. So it's about 2/3 more that we're seeing in our block of business, people returning to work versus when they have that extended period of time with their benefits, as well as that continuation of dialogue back with their employer. So loyalty is a big piece of it too.
That's interesting because it goes back to what Jackie was saying as well, that retention, even attraction of talent, right? It's about the culture that you have to make sure your people feel like they have the flexibility to take the time they need.
Yeah, I mean, we're finding that it's really important. I mean, if you think about the most important things when a person's out on leave, medical, coverage, continuing that medical coverage is going to be number one. Number two is extending those other programs while they're on leave. That's right behind that medical. So it's a very big, important, piece to the puzzle.
Thank you, Brett. Let's take a look at unpaid personal leave of absence. And I'll be honest, this is where employer support is the weakest. So first, we saw that 78% of employers offered unpaid personal leave, but the maximum duration varies widely. 33% of our population in our survey said that they cap it at 1 to 3 months. 29% allow 4 to 6 months, and only 9% permit manager discretion on duration. Industry patterns are also striking here. Tech firms offer the longest personal leaves. 40% allow 7+ months. Education shows the highest flexibility, with 25% permitting manager discretion. By contrast, retail and manufacturing tend towards shorter periods, with 30 to 40% capping at 3 months. In terms of benefit continuation during unpaid personal leave, 66% continue medical coverage, 61% maintain basic life insurance, and about 59% continue dental and vision. Those numbers sound reasonable until you look at the cost sharing breakdown. 66% require employees to pay their share of premiums, which is higher than both STD and LTD. And 31% require full premium payment, essentially putting employees on COBRA-like terms. Only 36% allow deferred payment and just 26% adjust premiums. This is problematic because personal leave often supports caregiving, mental health needs, and other non-medical but critical life situations. So employees taking these leaves may have no income replacement at all, yet they're being asked to maintain or even increase their premium contributions. In terms of industry, financial services and professional services continue in medical coverage at 85% and 89%, but retail shows the weakest protection, with 51% only continuing medical benefits. So unpaid personal leave is kind of the forgotten stepchild of leave policy, if you want. It receives far less attention and support than medical leaves, and even though the employee needs may be equally as significant.
Hey, Sarah Lee, let me jump in here before we get too
Sure.
far away from the disability. There was a question that came into the Q&A feature. And I'll direct it to you first, Sarah, because I think it's part of the definition of the report, the survey work that you did, but certainly welcome Jackie and Brett's perspective on this as well. The question is, when you say entire or full LTD period, what do you mean by this? LTD benefits may continue until retirement age. Do you mean benefits continue until employment is separated?
So for the purposes of this, it's for the full time that the person is on their LTD, like for any given scenario, for the purposes of our study.
Okay.
Yeah.
Jackie and Brett, any kind of on the ground client experience or what you see in the marketplace? Is it till separation or is it all the way through?
Go ahead. Yeah, Jackie, you can
You
start.
go first. Go ahead,
Well,
Brett.
I think, when typically when you're on long-term disability, we do start seeing that that's a person who's not temporarily out anymore and they're not going to come back to work. So we do see that tends to get severed during that long-term disability period of time. Again, they have to make that determination if it's a temporary, if they think they're going to come back or not. So that was just that surprised me as well, is continuing benefits through that long-term disability. I don't see that happening as much in the marketplace, at least with the customers that we have. They tend to, once they get on long-term disability, if they do their evaluation and they're not coming back and there's nothing they could do to accommodate, that's when they would sever that relationship at that point in time, at least from our experience.
And I would add that it can go either way depending on the employer. It was for many, many years, it was very generous to take care of your employees who had disability because of their long tenure and the way in which they handled it and left it forever. What employers have figured out is that it's also extremely expensive. And it can, because there isn't in most places retiree medical anymore, that to leave disabled employees on their medical plan can make active employees have to pay a lot more for their insurance. And so there has been some philosophical decisions by organizations to try and assess that. What also has come into play is the ADAAA. So organizations, as they look at this and say, we're going to maintain you as long as you are on LTD, it could be until, although LTD would continue to the ADA schedule or the Social Security normal retirement age, it could be until you were separated. And at that point, from an ADA perspective, when they've gone through the interactive process and made a decision and separated the employee, they may put them on coverage. Particularly most organizations, if I were to say, and there's been a number of studies around how long do you keep people on medical who are on LTD, many of them would tell you that it's at about the 30th month when somebody becomes eligible for Medicare. So at that point in time, they may provide COBRA. They may actually pay for the employee. The employee may actually pay for their own benefits. But oftentimes you will see a 30-month so that it aligns when somebody becomes eligible for Medicare under Social Security disability.
Right. Two other questions have come in. Let me get these into the conversation. And Brett, I'll start with you on this one. The question is, what coverage do employers allow to continue while on a military or USERA leave?
Yeah, I mean, again, you're going to have to make sure that this is covered by your employer, but typically your life insurance, your long-term disability for a period of time will be covered through that period. It could range on different durations, but it's mostly standard through a period of time. And Jackie, you might have more perspective on that as well.
I believe it's based, other than USERA, which
Yeah.
is very specific, in terms of employer policy, they have many different policies about continuing pay, about continuing coverage for the family, for healthcare, as well as disability in life. Recognizing, however, that in the LTD plan, there is an exclusion if you are ill or injured as part of your military service, you are excluded from LTD benefits. So although LTD may sit out there, for the most part, if you become disabled while working, while you are deployed, then it would not be a covered event under LTD. So I would sort of put that out there as saying that the same thing in terms of it's usually acts of war or any type of military insurgency. It's usually an exclusion. And I'm pretty sure that Unum, as well as a lot of the other carriers, have that same exclusion.
We do. Yes.
One more question, and then we'll pick up the presentation again. And this one has a little bit of a twist. Jackie, so we'll send it your way to start. Question is, how do employers handle extending medical coverage beyond what the insurance contract allows and getting approval from the stop-loss carrier?
That's a really interesting question, and we recently went through this with one of our clients where we're implementing a new carrier as they're moving forward, and they decided to look at all of their leave of absence and benefit continuation. And their position is they wanted to be able to continue benefits as long as that individual was on one of their approved leaves of absence, recognizing that things like STD and LTD are really payment streams. They're not really leaves of absence in and of themselves. And so the first thing they did was go to their stop-loss carrier and say, here's what we would like the language to look like. We would like it to be as long as they are an approved leave of absence, which could be these 7 or 8 different things. And the stop-loss carrier was willing to do that and to use that language, although it's been a challenge for some of the carriers that it wasn't a defined period of time. But as part of when we do an implementation, we make sure that the policies for both life and disability are very clear, really along how long are they eligible for the benefit and under what circumstances. And then the employer's policy really looks at their benefit continuation so that it is in alignment.
Great, thank you. Okay, Sarah Lee, I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks, Jim. Okay, so let's actually talk about policy development and communication. So there are operational challenges that keep HR leaders up at night because even the best policy is only as good as your ability to administer it effectively. So first, policy documentation, and keep in mind this is policies for leave-related benefits, not policies for benefit continuation. So we asked our sample, and roughly 70% of employers maintain formal written policies for all leave-related types. That sounds good until you realize 27% only have written policies for certain leave types, and 3% have no formal written policies at all. So there's compliance exposure there. Without documented policies, you're opening yourself up to inconsistent application, potential discrimination claims, and regulatory violation. Let's talk about the top administrative challenges that employers were facing. Number one in our sample was tracking premium payments at 56%. Now, these were a select all that apply, so they could have chosen more than one option here. This is the single biggest headache, though, and it makes sense because you've got employees coming in and out of unpaid and paid leave, premium structures changing, deferred payment waivers, and technology firms that we, in our sample, actually had the highest difficulty here at 74% reporting difficulty because of complex systems and rapid workforce change in that industry. Following this was communicating benefit options. 53% struggled with this. Employees were stressed, often dealing with health crises or caregiving demands, and we're asking them to understand complex benefit continuation rules. Financial services reported the highest difficulties here. Compliance with laws and policies came in at 48%. Manufacturing firms faced the greatest challenges in this area due to possibly multi-jurisdiction operations and varied employees classification. And coordinating with vendors and TPAs at 44% difficulty. Here's where education organizations struggled the most with this due to fragmented vendor landscapes. So as you can see, the challenges were there for everyone, but it varied significantly by industry, with technology firms facing system integration issues, education and organization dealing with multiple vendors, and manufacturing trying to navigate complex compliance. But the critical insight here is administrative challenges aren't just operational inefficiencies, they're directly impacting employee experience during vulnerable times. And so when employees can't get clear answers about their benefits, when premium tracking errors occur, vendor coordination breakdown, it erodes trust and adds stress during already difficult period. And as we heard before, that loyalty, that retention, that's part of the culture, that's part of the trust that employees are looking for. So we also looked at policy differentiation and compliance implications because this is where compliance risk meets equity concern. So 47% of our sample reported having differentiated benefit continuation policies based on various employee characteristics. So let's break that down a little bit. 50% differentiate based on length of service or tenure, 49% differentiate between full-time and part-time status, 46% between exempt and non-exempt, and 44% between work-related versus non-work-related disability. Again, they could have chosen more than one option here as to how they differentiate their policies. So some differentiation is permissible and even expected, but what's concerning is the variation by geography and industry suggests some of this differentiation may be driven more by historical practices than strategic policy decisions. Looking at the data by geographic footprint, 52% of single state organizations differentiate by occupational versus non-occupational status. But that jumps to 49% for multi-state and stays around 44% for international organizations. Why does it matter? Because differentiated policies require more complex administration. It creates more opportunity for errors, can raise equity questions, particularly around DE&I objectives that many organizations are prioritizing. In terms of industry, we saw that the technology firms had the highest rate of differentiating based on work-related status at 58%, and education led by employment status at 71% for full-time versus part-time. And organizations with 25,000 to 49,000 employees had the highest overall policy differentiation for work-related status. Jackie, I'm going to come back to you here on this compliance question. When you're advising clients who have these differentiated policies, maybe they're treating exempt differently from non-exempt or work-related injuries differently from non-work-related, what are some of the compliance landmines, so to say, that they need to watch out for? And how do you help them think through whether those differentiations are necessary or just kind of a legacy practice?
Well, part and parcel of what we try and ascertain is why does the practice exist in the first place?
Mm-hmm.
Because most of the time when they come to us, they're looking to start to create a consistent policy that is fair and equitable to their population. That doesn't necessarily mean it's equal
Mm-hmm.
all the time. And I think everybody believes that fair and equitable always means equal, and it not may not necessarily be so for a lot of reasons related to the demographics of the workforce, the turnover of the workforce, and how they see that. So we really work at trying to understand the root cause of why these policies are differentiated. Some of them are statutory. For example, for things like workers' compensation in some states, it is, I am not an attorney and I am not a tax attorney, so I will certainly put that disclaimer out there very clearly. But there is a belief that in certain states that even though you can uh, provide different benefits for work related versus non work related, that the ability to separate an employee is different if it's a work related versus a non work
Mm-hmm.
related injury or illness. And so, based on those decisions and their own counsel, they may have created policies that have that they believe are compliant. And in the current environment where compliance changes every single day, as most people who are on this webinar will tell you, that they have to reevaluate it
Mm-hmm.
on a regular basis. So our guidance is to understand the root cause, why they made those decisions, give them some advice based on what other clients are doing and benchmarking, assess and align with what their vision and values are to be able to manage these policies for their employees, and then come up with solutions with their counsel to make sure that it fits the organization's future direction and strategy.
Yeah, and a lot of it is very legally based in decision making as well, I imagine.
Yes.
Okay, let's move on a little bit to policy evolution because change is coming, whether organizations are ready or not. But most employers, 90%, reported no major policy change in the last 2 years. But a notable 10% who have made or are planning adjustments, they're doing so for very specific reasons. So, first, kind of like what you were talking about, Jackie, ensuring regulatory compliance with evolving state and federal laws. So we're seeing a patchwork of state level paid leave mandates, expanded FMLA type protections, and mental health parity requirements. And then another reason that they're making changes is advancing DE&I objectives, particularly around equitable access to leave benefits. So organizations are recognizing that leave policies can either reinforce or reduce the workplace inequities. And thirdly, they're integrating lessons from the COVID-19 pandemic, especially around mental health support and remote work flexibility. The pandemic fundamentally changed how we think about our work-life integration and employee support. Here's what it's interesting though. 18% of organizations in our survey in the information technology sector made changes to their policies. So tech is leading in policy innovation, which aligns with their talent competition strategies. But look at this, 100% of large employers with more than 25,000 employees reported no recent changes.
Hmm.
Does that mean their policies are perfect? Or does it suggest that larger organizations move a little slowly on policy evolution due to complexity and inertia? I'd argue it's the latter. And that creates an opportunity for forward-thinking large employers to differentiate themselves in the talent market by modernizing their leave policies.
Hey, Brett, is that consistent with what you're seeing out there? That's a pretty powerful
Yeah,
statistic.
it really is.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a lot of fatigue through the COVID, era. I mean, there was so much that they
Mm-hmm.
had to think about,
Change, yeah.
furlough, et cetera. So I think they're just kind of a little fatigued with the change. I will tell you, and I think Jackie mentioned this already, we see a huge consolidation, simplification across all their benefit programs. So there is still maybe they're not making huge changes, but they are trying to make some simplification just from an administration perspective to help. So that's what I see is most happening in the industry is more simplification, consistency,
Mhm.
is what I see.
And that
Jackie?
makes sense because sorry, Jim,
Yeah.
this was like in the changes in the last 2 years, right? Which is kind of when we kind of edged out of the pandemic a little bit. That makes sense.
Jackie, thoughts?
I think when you say no recent changes, I think the changes that they see for larger organizations, they tend to think of really big changes.
Mm-hmm.
They don't necessarily think about Delaware or Minnesota that are coming up on 126. Those are compliance changes. They are changing because they have to. They have no
Mm-hmm.
choice about those changes. Whether they're reevaluating what their short-term or long-term disability benefit looks like or life insurance benefit looks like, I think they do that with their advisors and their vendor partners pretty regularly. But I would say there hasn't been a lot of movement in that space. There's been a lot more movement in the healthcare space and trying to keep up with GLP-1s and pharmacy and a variety of other things that frankly are bigger fish to fry.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's an
Yeah.
important distinction because that would be my experience as well. You would not see Delaware as a change. It's compliance. We have to
Mm-hmm.
do it. We're going to do it. It's not a strategic decision that we're making about
Mm-hmm.
our programs. It's just what we have to do if we operate in that location.
Yeah, I'd say the other piece that we're seeing is the focus is a lot more on the technology, the HCM systems. There, how can we they're spending a lot more focus and really the investment seems to be in that technology. How can we help? How can we allow technology to help us administer the programs across, not just the benefits, but that it goes broader than that. But that's what we see too, is where the focus has been over the last couple of years.
Great.
All right. So let me kind of bring all of this together with some conclusions and recommendations. The big picture here is that large employers broadly support benefits continuation during medical leave, particularly under STD, to a lesser extent LTD program. That's the good news. The challenge is there are significant variations across employee size, industry, and geography. Larger and multinational firms really demonstrate a greater consistency, while others are facing a lot more operational and financial barriers. Unpaid personal leaves remains a weak point in many employer leave strategies, with minimal support for continued benefits and heavy reliance on employee paid coverage. And administrative complexity and policy fragmentation continues to challenge HR teams, underscoring the need for better systems and processes. So, what should you do with all of this information? From this study, we've developed 5 strategic recommendations. One is to standardize your policy. Develop comprehensive written documents for all your leave types and leave continuation, benefit continuation during leave. Ensures consistency, reduces compliance risks, makes administration more manageable. If you're in that 30% without full documentation, that really should be your top priority. Leverage technology, implement digital solutions for tracking premium payments, facilitating leave communications. It's especially critical for multi-state and international operations to look at this. And technology firms particularly struggle with this premium tracking, so precisely because manual processes don't scale. Address leave equity. Evaluate your policy differentiation based on employee classification. Are your distinctions necessary and defensible? Do they align with your DE&I objectives? And then strengthen your personal leave support. Consider extending benefit continuation provisions to unpaid personal leaves, support caregiving, mental health, and other critical needs. And then finally, enhancing communication. Develop multi-channel strategies that blend high-touch consultation with accessible digital resources. And accessible communication during leave should not be table stakes, should be table stakes, sorry. So let's emphasize, as employees' expectations around leave evolve, forward-thinking employers will see opportunity in modernizing their policies to support well-being, retention, and compliance. And the organizations that get this right will have a competitive advantage in retaining and attracting talent, like we've been talking about for most of the webinar. The ones that don't will really face that high turnover, lower engagement, and compliance exposure. So before I close and turn it over to conversation, just wanted to highlight some upcoming events that IBI has. And I know, Jim, you'll talk about this as well, but our forum is next week. Looking forward to seeing most of you there. And we also have a smaller session in November in DC with Kaiser Permanente. And then March next year is our research summit. So you can get more information on that at our website. And if you need any more information on the survey and research, you can always email me as well. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Sarah Lee. Appreciate that. And thanks for the plug on the upcoming events as well. Okay, Brett, let's turn to you. I know you've got a couple of slides you'd like to share with our attendees today from kind of your market perspective and what you're seeing out there.
No, certainly. I think that the information was telling as far as there's, about 20% of the surveyors, saying that they don't have really a formalized process or something in writing around how that works. And I'd say from a carrier perspective, and again, we're talking about your life insurance, your disability insurance, your dental insurance, vision, in those contracts, there will be provisions in there that says, when will you extend coverage when you're out on a leave of absence? And it's very, very important. I guess, it's easy to say, but it's more typical that you really need to review your contractual language in your contracts. And generally, carriers will be open as long as it's consistent and it's reasonable and it's not, in any conflict with statutory or legal protections, will mirror your HR policies. So they could put that language right in the contract. But again, that's something that you'd want to look at in all your contractual languages. Where's that leave of absence provision in there, and how long is that extended? Leave of absence and layoffs, obviously those are tended to be temporary in nature. We talked a little bit about that because ADA can get involved if that's part of the case. And it's different between, obviously, your medical leave and a personal leave, those types of things. So there are sections within the contract that you're really going to want to pay attention to and align them just with your policies, because certainly at claim time, you certainly don't want to have any gaps in coverage. Thinking the intent was to extend coverage, but it was really nothing in there that's been focused or formalized. The other part is, what are we seeing when it comes to administration, which is the biggest, concern with a lot of employers, is how do we keep this? Because one of the things that's most important to think about when you talk about your coverage extension is that continue of payment of premium. That's going to be in pretty much most of the contractual language that you see there. Certainly if it's on a medical leave or a paid leave, you can continue to take those deductions. But when you don't have that, it's what we're seeing is more employers used to kind of absorb that, but it just became too expensive, quite frankly. So most of our customers that we work with, again, we're talking more on the larger side, will utilize their ben admin system or that vendor to help provide that direct billing. So when a person's out on a non-paid leave, that those deductions continue, so they keep that coverage in place, but that's all administered by a third party. Most employers that we talk to on the larger end tend to have finally outsourced that versus keeping it in-house. There are options that you can prepay it. So if you have someone who's going out on, let's say, a maternity leave and they're not going to be paid for a period of time, certainly they can prepay that to make sure that their coverage is in place. But the catch up, I think we've even read some of the research here is, and I even work with customers, they say, well, what we'll do is when they come back, then we kind of charge them the back premium. And we would just caution you on that. Certainly most vendors and carriers are going to, try to work with you on those situations, but it's a pretty slippery slope. I mean, if they're not actively at work and they're not paying premium and they go out on disability, there's going to have to be, a real good record or reason that claim should be, covered in a situation, even though their premiums weren't paid. Again, the more documentation is important around that, and the more formalization you can have around that piece of it, if you are doing a catch up, is important as well. And then I would just say from a claim, evaluation perspective is, it really is onus on the employer to provide that information to us. So if you do have, you're outsourcing your leaves, any of those types of things. That's going to give you some consistency and a record of everything. But we're going to basically ask you, hey, can you verify that person's out on a effective leave, that's been approved by you and it matches within our contractual provisions, and then the payment of premium pieces of it. So the documentation, I can't underestimate that enough. There are some continuation provisions just that are built into normal policies. So under life insurance, the most common is going to be life waiver premium. Generally speaking, when a person's out on a disability, and usually there's different definitions of disability, so you can review that in your own life contract. But generally, it's you have a severe disability. You're not able to perform anything in the national economy type of thing. In that situation, once you go typically around 6 months, you continue premium up to 6 months. After that period of time, then the premiums would be waived. You'd be continued that coverage until your retirement, basically. Most employers, I would say, in the smaller market sector, probably will have that life premium provision. As you go up in size, we tend to see that the really, really larger employers tend to have a continuation of insurance. So they'll just continue to pay the premium on the employee's behalf versus paying for a benefit that would, because this is a cost, there's a cost to include waiver in your contract. So the larger the employer, I just get with your advisor and see what makes, economic sense there. But if you don't have waivers, it's not a bad thing. It's just you probably have a continuation that you're paying premium to keep that program in place, and it's more economical for your situation. There are portability and conversion options that if a person is out, that they can utilize. I would just say, portability. It does port to a term policy similar to what you would have in place on a group life program. There could be some limits and restrictions of when you can port. Sometimes there might be sickness and injury exclusions in there. So something just to be aware of, but that's usually available in today's world, a portability feature as well as conversion, which would convert into a whole life policy. No medical questions, but they can continue that, but it's a much more expensive policy to convert. On long-term disability, pretty much standard in the industry is you're going to have a waiver of premium for that. So if you're out on disability and you meet your elimination period under your long-term disability program, your premiums will be waived until you retire. So that will be in place. But that's normally when you're out on disability and you're receiving a benefit that you would not continue to pay premiums up in that particular situation. If you are on leave, you're not on, let's say, disability, you're not going to qualify for long-term disability. There are some policies that have conversion. I will tell you, it tends to be pretty expensive to include that in your policy. And what you're converting is not going to be, most likely not going to match up with the exact same long-term disability policy that you might have across, your program there. So just something to pay attention to. It is an option. It's available in the industry, but it just tends not to be the full coverage that you're converting to, and it is pretty pricey. So we don't see a lot of customers take advantage of that provision, but it's certainly available. And then I would say your other voluntary products like your critical illness or your worksite products, those tend to have a portability. They're individual kind of policies. Some of them, even though they're on a group chassis, they'll have a portability feature that employees can continue to pay premiums to keep those policies in place. Your dental and vision programs most likely will not have that portability feature. Usually that will kind of follow suit with kind of medical through a COBRA scenario, but just some continuation options to be aware of. And then I guess really last is I think we summed it up in the summary that we just went through, but clarity on the leave process, streamline the leave request as much as possible. I will tell you today with technology and if you are outsourcing your leave programs, most vendors out there are doing a good job of helping employers communicate what's available to employees when they're out on leave. There's leave planning tools that are coming out in the marketplace, and it continues to evolve. So that's going to help employers. It's certainly going to bring more clarity to employees when they're going through a leave. Is having that information when it matters most. I think the statistic at the end really here is when you do have a person who's out on leave, the more you can stay engaged with that that employee through that leave process. They're going to understand what's expected of them, number one, but more importantly too is they do tend to be more loyal and they tend to come back to work. And like I said, it's 2/3 of the times. We even see in some cases it's up to 80% when you have a really good leave program. You stay in touch with your employees. Most likely they do return back to work. And that's all I had for comments. Unless there's any questions.
Thank you, Brad. One question came to my mind. You mentioned about the review and the contract. In your experience, your client experience, is employment law involved from the client side? Like, not just the procurement person, no offense, but who's looking at this from the client side to make sure that it's aligned with their policies and also protecting the organization?
It's a great question, and oftentimes it doesn't come up unless there's kind of an implementation, a change in carriers. There'll be times that I know, they'll do a re-implementation, so to speak, just to make sure things are aligned. But you're right, it's something that sometimes can just kind of take a change in a vendor to really kind of go through, and those are the questions that vendors will ask. They'll say, okay, let's talk about your leave of absence policy. What is it for a layoff? Do you have layoffs? How long is it? And generally speaking, on layoffs, unions and so forth like that, you're going to have that contractual language provided. But generally speaking, if there's a question from a vendor that seems a little excessive, or maybe there is some compliance concerns, the vendor will bring a legal approach to it. But certainly it's on behalf of the employer. I think vendors are very quick to say, we're not your legal counsel, but we would suggest maybe you look at this a little more further, especially with all the statutory leaves coming up. I mean, I would think the majority of the time when we're looking at this is around the leave of absence, or I'm sorry, the FMLA leaves and those types of things, where a lot of that kind of is uncovered when you're kind of going through that process. But it's a great question. It does reside with the employer, but it is something that we really don't know it's out of compliance unless they're telling us. And so it's always good to do a refresher, I would say, to make sure it's in alignment.
Yeah, that's what I thought you would say. Ownership and accountability on the employer side, right? Ultimately, that's the plan sponsor and they own it. So for all the plan sponsors out there, make sure you've got the right team looking at it. From my experience, it's worth the time and effort, and even if there is a related expense to it, to do it upon implementation or new launch of a program is the time to do it, not when something falls through the cracks and now you're out of compliance. Thank you, Brett. Jackie, we have a few minutes left, but we'd love to hear your thoughts. We've covered a lot of territory today. You have tremendous experience, client experience and industry experience. What does this all mean to you? What do you see here? And I guess one thought that I'm sure people out there are thinking is, like, if they're concerned about where they are right now and they need some help, how do they go forward? What should they do?
Well, it's probably best to do an inventory first of your policies that are out there, to take a look and see across their entire continuum. I know one of my clients had their consulting partner do that across their entire continuum, similar to the stop loss. They started at stop loss and went through every single one of their programs. So that's the first thing they should do, is create an inventory, either internally or with your consulting partner, to try and understand what that means. Then to evaluate what you think or how long you want to keep these benefits intact for people while they're on leave. And there are so many paid and unpaid leave. The challenge that employers are facing is that there are certain states that require benefit continuation. There are certain states that require job protection. Then there's the federal and state FMLA that require continuation of health care. It doesn't necessarily mean life and disability, but it isn't just about health care anymore. And that's really important because we're talking about wage replacement and keeping people's ability to stay healthy while they're taking care of someone else or managing it. So my advice to employers is to, number one, take a good look at your policies, including your ADAAA policy. ADAAA does not necessarily require you to continue benefits. However, it does require you to continue benefits the same way that if you have somebody on leave as an accommodation, the same way that you handle anybody else on an unpaid leave. So it isn't as cut and dry as we would like in this space. So take a look at your policies, inventory them, get some advice in terms of what you want to do. Talk to your legal, take a look at it from a compliance perspective. And then once you've done that, make sure you communicate to your employees about what it is. Um, Most of my clients have what I would call the benefit continuation grid, where you can see everything that happens while you're on a leave of absence, whether it's paid or unpaid. And it's that grid that sort of helps people understand what they need to know when they need to know it in a snapshot. And that's a place to start from my perspective.
Jackie, that benefit continuation grid, is that a best practice that you would encourage employers to build?
Absolutely. It is definitely something that we when we work with clients, that we absolutely believe it's a best practice, that there should be a way to take a look at every single one of your benefits, whether it's medical, dental, vision, life, really basic life, um, and all the dependent life and spousal life that goes along with it, and your AD&D, and even just really what happens when you're on leave with your 401k, because a lot of times people need to know that they can suspend it and come back during that period of time, especially when you're on an unpaid leave. And FMLA allows you to suspend your leave. So people need and to suspend some of your benefits and come back in without EOI or other things. And all of those things are a very complex network that it's really helpful if you have that snapshot.
Jackie, we had a question come in. Is there a template you would recommend for the benefits continuation grid?
Um, I- Typically, we just create one with the benefits across the benefits down one side, and really the timing of what you currently have today, and then what you would like to have in the future, and what benefits you're going to allow with a check mark. So it doesn't have to be particularly exciting. It just really needs for you to be able to look at it and say, okay, I'm on an unpaid leave of personal leave of absence. What do I do to keep my medical, my dental, my vision, my life benefits? Will these continue? And then there's a commentary section of who pays.
Mm.
So, um, so that's to me is really what it looks like.
Great. And Brett, I would imagine if you're doing an installation of a new client, that would be a tremendous tool to have, a resource.
Absolutely. I mean, it's becoming a lot more. It's just a basic template that we would follow too. Any vendor would have their own template. They would want to map that out, not to the extent that Jackie talked about with all the benefits, but from a vendor, from an ancillary carrier perspective, it's exactly right. They have that grid. That's the first thing we ask about it, and we populate it into our system, and then we confirm it, and then we put it in the contract.
And I would imagine with the Ben admin vendor as well, from a payroll perspective and a Ben admin, that it would be invaluable to them as well. I mean, Jackie, I think you're right. It doesn't have to be elaborate, but it is a great starting point. And if somebody doesn't have one today, to start building it, start with the basic coverages and who is paying, how are you getting that payment, would be a great starting point, and then start to build. As Delaware comes online and Maine comes online, then you just keep adding columns and rows to your grid. Good. Well, we are at the top of the hour. This has been a great conversation. Brett and Jackie, thank you so much for your wisdom and insights today. Jackie, thank you, and ABC, American Benefits Consulting, for initiating the original survey work and the report that Sarah Lee wrote. We appreciate that partnership from you as a member company of the Integrated Benefits Institute. Again, a reminder to our attendees, we will be sending out a recording of the webinar, all of the slides that were presented, and we'll have a link to the report that Sarah Lee wrote. Thank you for your attention and your attendance today, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you.